Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Environment Committee on the 18th of February 2019. This meeting is being live streamed for the benefit of the community out there. So just a reminder that you are on camera. I'd like to call for apologies. I have an apology from Councillor Baldock for lateness. Can I have somebody move that apology? Moved by Councillor Curack, seconded by Councillor Cloud. I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. We now move to the public forum section of our meeting, and I'm informed that Enviro Hub, which was in our agenda, have rescheduled. So the next speaker on the agenda is Jason Edgecombe from Tauranga, and he will be speaking on the state of the climate. And I understand there's perhaps some action going on somewhere within the precinct as well, perhaps.
Can we hear me now? Oh, yes. Yes, we can. Excellent. Oh. First most difficult thing is to work the chair. Nope, don't spend enough time in council to work the chairs. That's all right. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So as Steve so kindly said, my name is Jason Edgecombe. And despite what I do for my day job, I'm not here to represent my interests as a small business owner or as a member of this community. I'm here to talk to you about the Extinction Rebellion, both here in Tauranga and globally, and about the action going on outside and why we feel we need to bring this to Council's attention. And first off, I'd like to talk to you a bit about my daughter. I have two of them. The oldest is nearly 4. And she loves the ocean. I mean, look at that. Anybody who lives here loves Tauranga Ocean. And the bit that really scared me about the climate change statistics is that by the time she is an adult, she will not be able to go swimming. Under the worst statistics I have seen, there may come a time within my life that if she goes swimming, she will die. And I'm just not okay with that. Personally, I'm not sure how many of you have children or not, but just the thought of anything harming my children is enough to get my blood boiling and make me start investigating things. And you can look up the statistics, and the ones I would recommend starting with are from the IPCC, which is I'm sure many of you have heard of the recent global committee on climate change, and a whole lot of scientists came together. And they had conversations, and they came to an agreement on what it is actually going on. And whether you're like some of the people in our movement who believe that those results they came out with are too conservative, or if you think they're just right, either way, they're scary. From my understanding, and I'm not a scientist, the biggest part I understand about climate change is I need to breathe, and it'd be really nice if I could keep breathing. But from what I understand of them, if we do not limit climate warming to beneath 1.5 degrees Celsius in the next 10 years, we are in for some very, very hard times. Now, I don't understand what the City Council does. I'm going to be honest about that. I also noticed that the timer is not up, so I have no idea how much longer I have to speak. That's all right. I'll wing it. I know you guys run the city. I know what you do is very important, but I don't know exactly what you do. I know you look after the economy of the area. I know you're looking out for the people. And I'm sure at some point you guys are doing something for the climate, but I'm sorry it's not enough. Just like most cities in our country are not doing enough. Most cities on the planet are not doing enough. Because we have known about climate change since I was a kid. I'm 29. 20 years I've been hearing about how bad climate change is. 20 years, mostly in Canada, but also here, they've been telling us we need to do something to change. And now, I hear that very soon my daughter cannot go swimming. Very soon, I will have to drink water that is filtered many, many times. I have learned that it may very soon come to pass that the amount of food that can actually be produced will drop well below what our population requires to survive. And those are only the bits I understand. You imagine how scary it is for people who actually understand the science behind climate change and what is going on. I don't know about you, but that freaks me out. And I'm not normally a person to panic. So our climate, our environment needs to become our highest priority. As a city, as people, as Tauranga, or that picture there will end up being just that, a picture of a bygone time that only some of us remember. And I like the mount. I like climbing it. It's very therapeutic. I would like it to stay nice and green. Now, I know you have been asked, or as far as I'm aware, you have been asked to declare a climate change emergency, as have many cities around the globe, and 297 of them have. But what does that look like? I'm sure you would like to know. I believe you all weigh your decisions very carefully. That's why you're in council. What a climate change emergency looks like is making our environment and the impact we have as a city on the climate the first priority in all dealings, in all considerations. It means actively engaging with Project Drawdown, which is aiming to reduce carbon emissions to 0 by 2025, and obviously reduce the amount we're actually warming the climate. And to form and participate with citizens' assemblies so that the people who understand and are concerned about climate change can bring this information directly to you so that you know exactly where Tauranga and the Bay of Plenty is sitting, so you can make the correct decisions as to how to safeguard our environment, our beautiful Moana, and the children who will one day sit in these chairs. I'm not sure if any of you have seen on social media the recent efforts of Greta Thunberg. Is that name familiar to anybody? She's in Sweden. She has spent quite a long time now sitting outside of Swedish Parliament every week demanding that they do more about climate change. She's garnering a great deal of international support, and there have been student marches all across the world, including in New Zealand. Now, I would like to think we don't have to go there. I would like to think that the people of Tauranga are wise enough and aware enough to recognize that while the education of our children is important, the environment is more so. And if you act, and act now, our children can stay in school and have a future that is worth learning for. I would also like to point out, which I'm sure all of you are aware of, that recently the United Nations declared 17 Sustainable Development Goals to be achieved by 2030, and New Zealand has signed off on them. I'm not sure if that makes us legally bound, but it certainly makes us morally bound to follow them and care for our city. So I call on you today to do this, to declare that Tauranga, as the first city in New Zealand, that there is a climate change emergency that must become our highest priority as citizens and people who live, breathe, drink, and swim. Because if we don't, if we treat this as just another scapegoat, as just another crazy conspiracy theory, then it is our children that will pay the price for it. And quite frankly, I don't like the idea of my daughter paying for anything. Maybe that's just me, maybe I'm weird, but I don't know. I'd like to wear my own mistakes. She can make her own. Thank you very much, and if you have any questions, I'll try to answer them to the best of my ability.
Thank you, Jason, and thank you for the passion you bring to the chamber. I can feel the genuineness in your heart in addressing this, and I certainly, as one, agree that climate change isn't really up for debate. I mean, the science has been settled. It is a reality, and it is here, as the IPC said numerous years ago now. But as someone who would be your friend and support you, claims about the swimmability of our ocean, saying that, for example, you used the example that your daughter may not be able to swim, it may be a lethal experience swimming in the ocean here. Those sorts of claims, personally, I don't think they help the message because they're not grounded in specific evidence that I can see. Do you have, aside from the body of work that science has done on climate change, which is comprehensive and, as I say, is a reality, I mean, do you have any evidence to back up the claims you made, particularly around the swimmability thing? Because that just stuck in my head because it was the first thing you said. I mean, yeah.
And definitely that stuck in my head when I read these things, because you're no more than 5 minutes from a beach in Tauranga. So there was a great body of evidence put together by the UK branch of Extinction Rebellion that detailed the science behind the way the ocean is going to become more acidic. And so you will excuse me, as primarily a public speaker as a trade, to embellish things, but certainly the science is there that our ocean is becoming more acidic and will become much more so. And I mean, that's grade school science. Things that are acidic tend to burn through things that aren't. But the science that it is getting more acidic is there. Yeah. I think looking through the IPCC's information is probably the best globally accepted source. As for another one, my colleague Gray or any number of people in the XR community would be able to give you specific references.
Thank you very much, Jason, for coming along. I'm just interested in what your views are on the government's zero carbon bill, aiming for carbon neutral, zero carbon by 2050. You mentioned aiming for zero carbon by 2025. What's your view on what the government is doing, and then how do we as local government fit in with that?
In terms of what the national government is doing, I have no idea. It's confusing and hard to read. But I do know 2050 is too far away. Because again, you know, with the IPCC, they had the opportunity to make it as acceptable to everyone as possible, and they said 2030. So if the number that they think anyone will accept is 2030 and our national goal is 2050, we've missed something. As far as what we can do as a city, I mean, you guys run Tauranga. So if the government says, let's go this far, and you go, well, we'll do one better, that doesn't sound bad for Tauranga to me.
I've got several questions. I've got Councillor Mason, Councillor Molloy, and then finally from Councillor Granger. Councillor Mason.
Okay. Just a suggestion, if you are going to come talk to us, should understand a little bit about what we do. It's just you know, it would help you to do that. But just we are doing a significant amount around protecting our community for climate change, especially around sea surges and protecting the marine environment, the borders of the environment around for the city. And I just might suggest if Christine, perhaps one of your team can send Jason perhaps a few links to some of the documents that we're doing. That's so that you know, it's good for you to understand in your city what we're doing. So if we can perhaps reciprocate that by sending you a few links to the type of work we are doing, and you will understand what is happening in your city.
That would be fantastic, because that information is not easily accessible to the lay people, which unfortunately means that people tend to look at council and go, they're doing nothing, which I know is not true. You guys are making effort. In terms of the making extreme efforts, the only thing I gotta say to that, I'm afraid, is I work with people every day who put in all the effort in the world. And it's not about how much effort you put in, it's about the right effort. And that's not meant as a criticism, that's meant as a consideration to look at what council is doing and whether or not we're doing the right things.
Thank you. Now I've got Councillor Molloy.
Hi, Jason, and thank you for that. And I certainly agree with you. People and the environment are our most important concerns. Everything else, if we look after those, we've got it right. But you'd really, I want to follow on with the swimming. But you know, if you're saying in your daughter's lifetime, if she swims in the ocean, it will kill her, which will mean in your daughter's lifetime, our oceans will be dead. Yeah. So I'd love to see science that backs it up. But anyway, no, thank you.
No problem. There was actually a very interesting video which I couldn't finish watching because I couldn't finish watching it. Talking about an effect whereby something doubles every certain amount of time. And the period of time, you know, between halfway to midnight and midnight is not the same as it took to get from 5 to 6. And we are at the point where we are halfway to midnight. And it is going to take a disturbingly short amount of time for us to go from, well, everything's pretty okay, to, well, we have to wear gas masks now. And that's a consideration I think needs to be put in, is we don't have time. We can't sit and go, well, is the science exactly right? Well, we don't have 20 years to figure it out. We know it's happening, we know it's going there, so we need to change.
Okay, I have a final question from Councillor Granger.
Hey, thanks, Jason, and look, thanks for sharing your concern for the environment. It was quite a shock for me too to listen to the statement you made regarding your daughter. Quite a shock. The only thing I struggle and try to get my head around here is that you say the people, are not doing enough, and I tend to agree with that. What happens in the case when, and say if the world in the next 10 years we have half a dozen or more of these volcanoes that let off a lot of emissions, there's nothing we can do about that. But what happens in that case? And it does, and it's just reality, and that's scary. So you're saying that we're not doing enough. What happens in that case?
We're buggered. No, that's in the case of natural disasters, and again, I'm not a scientist, so I don't fully understand these things, but people who are scientists and who I do tend to believe have examined the way our planet interacts with itself and with our influence on it. So we have studied, well, I say we, that's the royal we, people in the world have studied the way things move in cycles and the way small acts tend to cause larger ones. I believe it's referred to as the butterfly effect or chaos theory. So we know, for example, that yes, if a volcano goes off, throws heaps of stuff into the air, and that's an extinction event. If it's a big enough volcano, there's very little we can do about that. However, what we also know is that we have an impact on the planet, and we have a larger impact than any single species in terms of conscious choice. And our massive industry and the way we have terraformed, because that's what we have done, is we have terraformed large parts of our planet to suit our short-term needs. That has an impact. It may very well be that our short-term focus is causing an increase in these events that we can't do anything about. And my favorite way of looking at that kind of thing, because in my personal work, you know, I can't fix every school, I can't help every child, but that doesn't mean I shouldn't try. I can help the ones that I can reach. I can convince the parents that I can talk to rethink the way they look at their children, and I can help the ones I can. We can do what we can do. An extinction event is going to happen whether we do anything about it or not, but let's not be the ones to cause it. I think that's just stupid. Thank you.
Thank you for your time, Jason, and thank you for, I could hear some voices outside which may have been related, so look, thank you for that, and your message has been heard and received. For more information on local government's response to climate change, colleagues pointed out to me, if you have a look on the LGNZ website, Local Government New Zealand, there are possibly a few more statements than measurable actions at this stage, but that will give you an idea where local government as a collective is kind of heading in this realm. But thank you for your presentation today. Thought-provoking. I guess from my perspective, again, you know, having an evidence-based conversation is really important, and I appreciate the passion and that you bring to it. But equally, you know, having an evidence-based conversation is important to make decisions on in the future too. So, but thank you very much.
My job is to get you guys to go and have those conversations. So fantastic. Thank you very much, everyone, for your time.
Colleagues, we'll move on to the chairperson's report. Very briefly, you'll recall Jeff Chard came and spoke to us in the public forum last meeting in December around the glass collection. I've since spoken with him on the phone for about half an hour regarding that, and picked up some useful pointers from him. And we've also got our staff who are reporting back in the April committee meeting on recommendations for the future waste collection service, which will include glass. And also circulated previously was a letter from our staff to Mr. Chard in response to the public forum. Moving on to the lead officer's report. Joel, over to you.
Thank you. I've just tabled just a handout for you, just covering off the actions. I'm happy to take any questions on those. Essentially, there's the feedback from the public forum, which the chair has covered, and we've got the update to the waste management and minimisation update.
Mayor Brownless, question to the lead officer. Mayor Brownless.
Yes, just in relation to the report back on the curbside collection of glass, I sort of tend to think that if we can't get that right, we're going to have big problems when council at this stage is down to take over the whole collection. So we've got to get it right. And I'm not too convinced, so I want to question it further, the idea that a competent driver with both rear vision mirrors and a camera can still crash a truck or indeed any vehicle. And I think that the issue then becomes one of driver competency, not the fact that it's inherently dangerous. So I'd like that looked at, you know, further before we say, oh no, someone's had a little accident and they still had a camera and they still had what are they doing? Are they trained as drivers? So I don't want to just dismiss it out of hand till we've looked at that.
In support too of the Mayor's comments, I can see this driveway every day, and it is a wide, straight, but it is a right-of-way. And so I hope the report coming back is specifically, wasn't clear from your comments, Mr. Chairman, but that it specifically addresses this issue of right-of-ways across the city, because it seems to me it's not meeting the standards so-called, but we may have the standard just too high, as the Mayor suggests, and we need to look at serving the people who happen to be down right-of-ways. Obviously safety is important, but we've got to look at that, because I think I was told 10% of our residents are down right-of-ways of some sort in the city, and that probably will come back in the report as to whether that's accurate, but that's a lot of people who are having to bring their own glass to the curb.
Thank you, Councillor Baldock, and I think that's something the committee would like to see addressed within the report. Councillor Granger, a question for the lead officer.
Yeah, just one point that's been brought up as regards to the trucks down right-of-ways. It's just that too. We have to be careful here, because some of these right-of-ways are not that very big, and some of these trucks are. And the thing is you've got to look at it as regards to the size of the truck going down. They're very, very small right-of-way. And who is liable if anything happens to the right-of-way, to the tar seal, to the concrete, etc., and so it goes on. Apparently, I understand we've got to sign off where we get their signatures on board, but the thing is we've got to be careful as regards to those trucks going down those small, definitely small right-of-ways.
Okay, anything further, Joel? No, good as gold. Oh, Councillor Stewart.
Thank you. Just through the chair, on the report that I believe is coming back in a paper to us in April, is that what you said, Mr. Chair?
That is on the wider collection service, yes, including glass and, yeah.
I guess my concern is that in that paper that it gives options for people like one-person families through to larger families, and also how we're going to deal with right-of-ways, as was mentioned before. So I hope it'll be a comprehensive report that will address the issues affecting all of the community, from the, as I said, one-person family through to larger families and right-of-ways, and also units and high rises as well, how we're going to deal with that as well. Thanks.
Okay, Christine Jones.
Yes, here we go. The report that's coming to you is not going to, I think there might have been misunderstanding about what level of detail it's going to be. So it's the first report that's going to come to you around the different waste streams and whether you wish to collect these different waste streams and where those products would go. So you remember in the LTP, you made a decision that you wanted to look at all of the whole waste streams, and then before that work could be completed, the private sector made the decision not to continue with glass provision in the city. So the council took the action to move into glass collection, otherwise there would have been a gap and all that glass would have gone to landfill. So that was actioned in advance of the remainder of all of the other waste streams. So this report is coming to you to say what level of service do you want to provide in terms of waste that's not recyclable, paper, organics, all of those types of materials. Are there markets for them? How would we be able to use them, etc.? And then to move forward. It's not going to go into yet the detail around whether or not we're going to go up right-of-ways. It's an earlier piece of work leading to whether or not those services are going to be provided by the council.
Thank you for explaining.
I think within that report, though, there's a section on difficult to access properties.
Jeremy, I'm not involved in the detail of it, but I don't think it's going down to that level of detail. We're trying to get some of the higher order questions first. Once we're clear about which services you want to provide, so say if you decide you want to go for organics or green waste, then you can look at how is the best way to collect those materials once we understand which materials you're going to be collecting over the long term.
Councillor Robson.
First time. Just following up through the chair to Christian, if I may, that report, I'm kind of want to put on record, I don't want it to be too generic. You know, we understand most of the basic waste stream stuff is pretty much in the public domain. If anyone's remotely interested in what the previous public forum speaker was about, they'll understand that this is part of that same discussion about the sustainability of the way we occupy, you know, Aotearoa, New Zealand, this planet. That being said, I don't want it too generic. I would like to get some feel for costs and risks around the waste stream adoptions. Without costs and risks, you know, it may seem like a good idea to address a certain waste stream, but if it's an enormous cost and there's a very high risk that there will not be a market for it in a year, 3 weeks, whatever. So I'm just looking for confirmation that this is not going to be some sort of generic, in principle, philosophical paper, but actually something that informs decision making.
No, so it is exactly trying to do what you're talking about, and it's also looking at internationally the markets for various product streams and whether or not realistically there's likely to be a market for those items, and therefore what revenue can be generated from them, or whether you might be collecting recyclables but actually having no market and delivering them to the landfill, which makes no sense. So it is trying to understand those issues and the costs associated with them.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. After your eloquent comments earlier about science and its role in society, that we need to be able to look at evidence. Still going through our recycling plants, as well as that which is being picked up the curbs, because we may, that trend may be interesting to analyse. Has it led to more glass being recycled, or basically the same amount? People aren't going to the transfer stations with their glass, and therefore, perversely, are they now not recycling other stuff as much? Glass is probably the one thing most people don't want to throw into a rubbish bin. I'd be interested in that sort of analysis if it's possible.
But when we were budgeting on the service as part of the annual plan, and we did our best guess, we estimated how much collection quantity would be collected, and therefore the number of trucks that would be required. You'll see in the annual plan agenda for Thursday annual plan meeting that we're actually needing another truck because the volumes are so high that it's taking them longer to actually get around the city, which is a great outcome. We're getting more quantity being recycled and being put out community, and we're sort of higher than sort of the averages that we had estimated based on other cities. So it's a good result.
Any further questions, colleagues? No? Okay, we'll move on through the agenda. Acceptance of late items, there are none. Confidential business to be transferred into the open. There is none. There is one confidential item right at the end of the meeting, which is simply the confirmation of minutes. Change to the order of business, there is no change. If we move now to confirmation of minutes on page 8 of your agenda. Does anybody have any questions or items for correction of those minutes before we move to adopt them as true and correct record? Okay, I would like somebody to move those minutes to true and correct record. Moved by Councillor Baldock, seconded by Councillor Clout. I will put that. Well, actually, firstly, is there any discussion? No, I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, and carried. Then we've got declarations of conflict of interest. There are none. And we move now into the business of the day, which is the hearings about the water supply bylaw, the water meter policy, and large water users policy. We've got staff Peter Bars and Jane Barnett who are going to introduce the report.
So the water supply bylaw has been under review, and as part of the review we assessed whether the conditions in that bylaw were still appropriate. So we did that review and resulted in a number of changes, as you know, and on the 23rd of October the committee approved that draft bylaw to go out for consultation along with the draft water meter policy, and that was a new policy outcome of the review. And we also added to that consultation package the large water users policy, which was a policy that was approved by the committee back in May, and that sets out council's priority for water allocation and also sets out a criteria for any new large water users. So that's anyone seeking approval to use over 15 metres cubed a day. And so we had a whole package go out for a month over October to the end of November, and we did some targeted consultation as well with the Property Developers Forum, all members on the IDC list, and Tangata Whenua, and all existing large water users too, so they were aware of those changes. And we received 12 submissions, and a few of those submitters wish to speak today, and so that's the purpose of the hearing. So I'll leave it for you to introduce each submitter. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Jane, if you look on page 16 of our agenda, colleagues, we need a mover and a seconder that we receive these submissions and also agree to hear from the submitters here today. Moved by Councillor Stewart, seconded by Councillor Curack. I will put that. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, and that is carried. Okay, we have our first speaker here. That is Nikki Johnson, who's the Chief Executive of New Zealand Kiwi Fruit Growers. Welcome, Nikki. You have 10 minutes to make your submission. You can use the time as you wish. If you finish before 10 minutes has elapsed, colleagues may wish to ask you some questions. So thank you, and it's over to you.
Good afternoon. I am Nikki Johnson, the CEO, and this is Sarah Cameron, my Senior Policy Analyst. And Sarah will be doing most of the talking today. She's been involved in the writing of the submission, and I'm just here to support her. So we'll make some key points from our submission and then take any questions that you may have. All yours.
Hello, everybody. So before I go into detail on our points of the policies, I'd just like to provide a bit of background. There are 24 metered water connections serving 14 properties with 77 combined canopy hectares, which can contribute more than 8.8 million to the local economy. There is one in Bethlehem, which is on Tauranga City Council owned land, leased to East Pack House, with the rest being in Matapihi. Before I talk about the large water users assessment policy, I'd just like to offer an apology. In our submission, we stated that it wasn't clear if the policy covers existing users. We acknowledge that the policy does, and we apologise for the error. So just talking about a large water users policy, our understanding of the policy is that kiwi fruit has been classed in the low priority large water user category, which means that growers will generally be declined as a large water user unless peak demand occurs outside the peak summer water demand season. Orchards in the Matapihi area are mostly established and require regular irrigation to ensure optimal fruit size and plant survival. Other areas where there are no irrigation, we are seeing leaf droop, browning vines and smaller fruit size. Growers are paid on fruit size, and water stress will have a direct impact on their financial returns. It is our view that giving a low priority for horticulture purposes has the potential to directly impact on economic viability of growing kiwi fruit in the Bay of Plenty region. Further to this, we note that sports and leisure facilities have been assessed as having a medium water use priority. We submit that maintaining healthy kiwi fruit plants are vital to the economy, and in particular employment opportunities in the Bay of Plenty, and that water use is more important than providing water for a sports facility. So moving on to the water meter policy, we have sought clarification around clauses 5.5, 6.4 and 6.5. Thank you.
Thanks for that. It is focused primarily on Matapihi as the area that you were affected by. So what other options? I know you touched on bore supply here in your submission. Are they options you need to explore further? Is it possible?
So we're going through a review at regional council level of water policy at the moment in terms of both our Plan Change 9 and Plan Change 12. Over allocation of catchments is a serious concern for us. There is no guarantees at this point as to whether those facilities or those growers in those regions would be able to obtain water through bores. It's not something that we've investigated on a case-by-case basis at this point.
It does seem a little illogical to the average mind that we would treat water to a AAA kind of quality for health purposes and then be applying it on the soil for irrigation long term. It's not likely to be sustainable long term if kiwi fruit continues to require this kind of amount of irrigation. Are you looking into long term other options apart from the ones you just mentioned?
No, I mean, this is a situation that there are 70-something hectares of individual growers that are impacted by this change in policy, and we are submitting on that change in policy. So at this point in time, they have access to the water that they will not necessarily have access to under the proposed policy. So that's what we're submitting on. It's not a situation where we can go between October and now to do an individual case-by-case for each of those properties in terms of the water options available to them. In terms of the water quality, we do have minimum requirements for water quality for kiwi fruit. I mean, granted, we don't necessarily need to have it at the same level as you would for a municipal supply, but there are requirements for our industry and our overseas customers around water quality that would need to be considered.
Thank you, Councillor Baldock. Councillor Clout.
Thanks very much, ladies, for coming and presenting to us. How does our policy compare to Western Bay District Council? Because presumably, well, obviously, most of the kiwi fruit orchards are in their jurisdiction. Do they have a large water users policy or not?
The short answer is we don't know. I haven't looked at Western Bay Council in terms of that. I'd say the majority of them would be outside municipal supply, but there will be some, if the same policy is occurring in Western Bay, that would be affected, but I can't answer that question, sorry.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your submission. My question's been covered as well, but thank you for your time and writing a good submission. Appreciate it. Thank you. We'll be considering it at a later, so we're doing the hearings today, and then we'll be considering the submissions later on. But thank you.
Thank you for your time. If there is anything you require clarification of, please don't hesitate to contact us. We can do some more work, although I doubt I'm going to be able to answer your question in the short term.
Next submitter is Oscar Stevens from Ingham's Enterprises Proprietary Limited. Thank you. As I've said to the previous speaker, the 10 minutes is yours to use as you see fit, but if you finish earlier, there may be some questions. Thanks.
My name's Oscar Stevens. I represent Ingham's Enterprises. I am the operations manager for feed milling for Ingham's Enterprises. We've put this submission in basically to cover, we've been identified as low priority, even though we're a high user of water. We would like to submit that we should be given some preference under industry activity of a national significance due to what we do from the processes in Mount Maunganui. Just to give you some sort of background detail of what we're doing, most people seem to think of water as, when it comes to livestock, as drinking water. What we do is we produce poultry feed at our mill at Mount Maunganui, a total of 4,382 tonne on average every week. 2,700 of this goes to our own internal poultry birds, and 1,608 goes to external partners that we have as well. And all we feed over 1,074 birds a week. The feed that we supply is 100% of the diet provided to these birds, so there is no other food source. So if we were not able to get a water supply to run our boilers to produce our feed, that would have some significant animal welfare issues. The mill that we have at Mount Maunganui can only store about 850 tonne, which is about 1 day's supply. We also supply feed for layer birds to produce eggs, and also a duck supplier in New Zealand. We supply 100% of its feed as well. That's probably about all I've got to say, really. If you've got any questions.
Oh yes, Councillor Robson.
Perhaps not the speaker, but can we get clarification to the staff why the prioritisation was at that low level, given the information we've had today? On what basis did the staff make the prioritisation? Because that may be of interest to the presenter.
The background behind, I think it's going back to the previous conversation around we are treating, so we're putting a lot of infrastructure costs in and a lot of operational costs in treating water so that it gets to a standard appropriate for potable water for human consumption. And there's also the regional policy statement talking about the need for us to deal with the water resource sustainably and taking into, we're trying to think forward and thinking about when we come to renew our water resource consents. One of the issues the regional council will be looking to for us is how have we managed the use of water that we've got, how have we encouraged the community to use it wisely, which we do through things like water charging. And how are we thinking about large water users and how that water is being used sustainability. So that's really where some of this came from, and thinking about human consumption being at the top of the hierarchy. Steve might cover it. We haven't singled out any particular business. It's the activities or types of business. So I'll let Steve cover that off.
I'm not quite sure what you exactly what you want, Councillor, but we did use the principles that we've set out in the document to say that it's human consumption, and progressively we've looked at a whole lot of other elements in terms of you know, that can be brought into consideration when somebody makes application. The existing large users like Ingham and others, they're in place, so they're a part of what we supply at the moment, and we're looking at the growth in demand in the future, and we're trying to align that in our water management plans, which are aligned to the regional council's requirements under the policy and the Plan Change 9. We're trying to get those to align with one another. So we will work with existing large users and see how they're going, but we're not going to ask them to reapply as a new large user, if you know what I mean. But anyone coming into the city as a new large user, we're going to run them through a process, and we're going to have a hierarchy to look at, you know, whether if they're a large national, having a large national presence like yourselves, that'll go up higher on the ranking, and if, you know, you have a number of people you employ, it has a strategic value to the sub-region. All those elements will be brought into that. So it's still something being worked on, but the principles are that we're trying to manage within our consents that we have the water most efficiently, and to be able to show that to the regional council who hold who've given us the consent.
Mr. Burton, just to try and remove all doubt, so existing use rights are existing use rights. Is that correct in terms of the water supply? Is this only new applications, or does it apply to everybody?
So we get the existing large users are in place, and we're going to work with them in the future, but not to get them to reapply. We're just going, as we have with the residential sector, we've worked with them over several years, and we've had a really good outcome. We do work with some of the large water users already, so it's good relationships with our large water users.
Yeah, through the chair to the staff, if I may, given that our water supplies are under pressure and will continue to be under pressure as we go forward into the future, what and there will be conflict between industrial and residential use. What provisions are we making for that industrial supply going into the future? Because you know, the industries around the city are to some extent our lifeblood, and they are, though not as important people and community, they are still critically important. What provision are we making for that?
So in terms of the projections of the quantity of water supply that we need to provide for the future of the city, and non-residential use is provided within that. What this policy is defining is that within that there may be some large water users who wish to come to the city, and if you think about one end of the spectrum, if they were high water use, low economic value to the city, low number of employees, that wouldn't be looked, and not a strong alignment with our underlying economic areas of importance, as opposed to potentially something that might be strongly linked to our economy, so may have strong links to horticulture, for example. It may be off-season, so not in the peak summer period. It may be over sort of winter months or after the kiwi fruit has been harvested, so from March through to September. It might provide significant employment. All of those factors would be taken into account to determine whether or not it would be a large water user that the council would be willing to and able to support. And also not just water, but then also the wastewater from production. Sometimes that wastewater is also entering our wastewater system, and if that's high volume, and if the nature of that volume is such that it's difficult for our plant to process, all things that we need to take into account. So really just saying we need to assess water and wastewater demands on the city, because it's all impacting on the use of the natural resource and the costs of the infrastructure and the operational costs attached to it, sometimes maybe for just one or two large users.
Thank you very much.
Look, no more questions. Thank you, Mr. Stevens, for coming in. Your submission has provoked a number of questions from my colleagues to staff, so thank you for that. It's been an informative submission, and we'll be making a decision at a later date on the submissions heard. Thank you. Our next submitter that we have scheduled is Keith Frentz from the DHB, but I don't see Keith anywhere. The next person we have scheduled is Kevin Hill regarding dust suppression, but I'm just wondering, is it Mr. Cooney, are you going to speak to us about that, please? You're very familiar with the process. 10 minutes is yours to use as you see fit.
So I'll just read through this briefly. Look, Peter Cooney, Director of the Classic Group. We're a large contributor to a significant sector, economic activity and benefit in the city. Many blocks of land purchased for development are not served by a private bore water supply. Those blocks that have a bore are either unconsented or have consents for irrigation use or frost protection at lower volumes than required earthworks. Our business is delivering residential developments, commercial and industrial buildings. In this respect, we are no different to a commercial or an industrial activity. It takes a range of raw materials, resources and council water to turn these into a saleable product. One key difference to a typical manufacturing activity is that our activity is outdoors and not contained within a factory or undercover. The other key difference is that our water use is also intermittent across areas of the city. It is also minimal outside of earthworks season. In order to deliver earthworks to provide for houses as the end product, we need to add water to our raw materials for dust control, environmental controls, and also to achieve soil moisture contents that enable soil to be compacted to achieve the specified density and bearing capacity for housing and other future development to occur. As soils dry out over summer, a large portion of our water use is aimed at bringing the soil to the correct moisture content to allow for compaction to occur. Earthworks should be listed as either high or medium priority in Table 1 to ensure that development activity is awarded the exact same status as an industrial manufacture like the Fert Works, the Salt Works or Ready Mix Concrete plant. By omitting our activities from the table and making dust control a not permitted use, Council is intentionally harming our sector and the city's economic development. Land development and the building or development sector are significant creators of economic activity, additional rates, jobs. Water use for our development activity generally also has no impact on the wastewater system. By not including earthworks and development activities in Table 1, the sector is being severely discriminated upon by Council. We seek include earthworks and development in Table 1 as either high or medium priority. Many blocks of land purchased for development are not served by a private bore water supply. Those that have a bore, as I say, are either unconsented or have consents for irrigation use or frost protection. We are generally undersized for land development temporary users. For smaller developments of land that does not have a private consented water supply, it is not economically feasible to install a temporary bore supply or feasible to attain a water take consent. For example, a 28-lot subdivision as part of the earthworks consent application, we need to prove to Regional Council that we have enough water for dust suppression and environmental controls. Without a consented bore on site, our only water source is TCC water. If we're not even allowed to use a single 20 mil supply, our development consents and all development work in the city relying on TCC water will dry up. The ironic thing is that straight after the subdivision is completed, 28 households can connect as of right and use as much water as the 20 mil connection will deliver without many constraints on use. It thus seems reasonable to allow one or more connections for development purposes. On larger developments, it may be feasible to install a private bore. However, we are unsure how TCC is planning to deliver 15% of growth in brownfield area as infill development if nobody is allowed to use TCC water. For example, you've got demolition work requires water or dust control. Water is essentially our main means of dust suppression. Minimise health and safety issues with poor visibility, enable soil moisture contents to be achieved for compaction. By not allowing water for dust suppression and soil conditioning, this development sector will be harshly affected, and this will just negatively impact on housing supply and affordability to all end users. I think I can probably just about skip the rest, but you know, what we're saying is water is a critical part of our industry, and if you're not going to provide us with dust control over the periods that we need it, then you're not going to get development. We're not going to be able to get consents, and I don't know how you're going to do infill development. And if you're relying on 15%, which I think your rate's far too high anyway, but if you're relying on 15% of infill and you're not allowed dust control, I mean, how are we going to do a development? It beats me. Anyway, any questions?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Cooney. I remember as a kid when Royal Palm Beach Estate was developed, we lived to the east, or a couple of kilometres to the east of that, and there wasn't a lot of dust suppression used back in those days, and it was something I can well remember, the dust storms, and nothing that, you know, I lived in Dubai a few years after that, and they did remind me of living in Papamoa back in the early 90s. So I think nobody would argue about the absolute need for water and dust suppression, but my question is, does it need to be the municipal supply? If you were able to get access to, say, stormwater retention ponds, or even the treated wastewater at Te Maunga, would those be a suitable alternative to the AA quality drinking water that we've got in the city?
It doesn't matter what sort of water it is, as long as it's water. But it's getting access to the water is difficult. If you've got a 20, as I say, you've got a 20 or 30 lot area somewhere. I mean, you haven't got room to build ponds on a 28 lot development. You sort of need it. And as I say, it's intermittent work. It's only when there is a really, really windy day. So it's minimal use.
Thanks, Peter. Just while you're here with us, your submission has covered off the policy and the bylaw pretty clearly, but we're in this water restriction period now too. How does that affect, I mean, it's probably going to occur more in the future. It's the summer period, and that's when you do your construction stuff, and when we have restrictions being applied. So how do you manage that when suddenly, you know, you've got a resource consent, you've got what you were going to do with the dust suppression, and then suddenly there's a restriction? How do you work through that?
With great difficulty. If you've got a site opened up, how are you going to deal with it? You know, there's nothing you can really do apart from put water on it. Otherwise, you've got to put straw and things like that down in the meantime, then you've got to take it off. It just adds extreme amount of cost and delays to developing it. And don't forget, we've only got in the earthworks season, you've got a very limited window to do earthworks. It is very limited here in Tauranga, and if you get a season where you've got a water restriction on, you're not going to get a lot of work done. You're going to roll over into the next season, and those costs of that land's just gone up considerably. And so once again, you're just adding cost on cost on cost. But it is with great difficulty if you haven't got water suppression. It makes it just about impossible if you're only opening up 2 or 3 hectares or 4 hectares of work, which you often are in those big developments.
If it's already opened and then the restrictions come, I mean, we all, none of us want dust.
Well, you'll get
because
dust.
it goes into the harbour. I mean, this is what happens. It's not like it's just a nuisance because you're breathing dust, but it actually ends up in our waterways, doesn't it? So, okay, thank you.
Just following on from that to the staff, you know, given that the season for earthworks is in the summer, given that theoretically our summers are going to get hotter and drier going forward, has any work been done, and the importance of being able to continue with our development? Has any work been done on how we can circumvent that problem?
So the Tauranga City Council staff have been working with the regional council staff around utilising stormwater pond water, and that has been agreed with the regional council over the last 2 summers, and we're looking to whether that could be done more extensively and what provisions that we need to be put in terms of protecting the stormwater ponds, any life that might be in them, making sure we're keeping minimum levels and protecting the ecology around the edges of the stormwater ponds so that you can safely access. So there's a little project at the moment between particularly Steve Burton and his team and the Regional Council team in terms of the land, air and water plan to make sure that we've got good processes and plans in place. It may need a little bit of a tweak to the Regional Council plan, and we're looking to see if that could happen before the next summer season. So well underway, and we're working with developers to provide them opportunities to access our stormwater ponds at the moment, and that's happening where they've got a need. I don't know, Steve, if you want to add any more to that.
Supplementary, if I may, is it possible to use seawater for, say, dust control, or would that sour the land? Is it be able to do that?
I couldn't tell you on what it'd do to the soil conditioning. A lot of it is to do with the soil conditioning and compacting it. You're in a very dry season. It just doesn't compact unless you mix some water with it. Does seawater work? Look, I couldn't tell you on that. Again, you know, this we're getting more. The large-scale projects, you can actually build yourself ponds and fill it up with water and work. It's workable. You can even put a bore down, providing you've got scale. But I'm talking more of this infill development that you're talking about. You know, if we go to try and get a consent and we can't get dust control, you know, we can't tap into a 20 mil line from council to give dust control. How are you going to do a development infill? How will we do it? I can tell you now, we won't bother doing any of them if we can't get a consent, because all we're going to get is go and develop it and get our hand smacked the whole time for not providing dust. And when you're in infill, who do you think's going to want the dust protection? It's your neighbours next door, because you're at such close proximity. When you're in a big development, you know, there are better ways to manage it. So I do have some major concerns on your infill philosophy.
Yeah, I think thanks to Christine for the update on what's going on, but I'm a bit worried that if it comes to the Regional Council and protecting little creatures, we may have difficulty. Perhaps our resident member may comment on it. But Peter, you'd be in a good position to tell us with the lakes, for example, here's this fantastic development where the stormwater ponds have been turned into a recreational facility. Have you tried to get access to that water because you're working up in that area? I think it's, you know, I can imagine the residents saying, no, we don't want it. We don't want a dry pond because we've got virtually drought conditions now.
I probably wouldn't want to go. I probably wouldn't want to go through the hassle of getting the consent to get it. It'd probably take me a season to get it, and it'll be over.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kearney, for your submission. The council will be deliberating and deciding on the bylaw and policies at a later date. Appreciate it. Thank you. And finally, our last submission for today, we have Michael Brooks from Pure Bottling New Zealand Limited. Mr. Brooks, the 10 minutes, which is about to start, is okay. You can use that as at your discretion, and there may be some questions afterwards. Thanks.
Thank you. Sorry, excuse my lack of preparation. I did not know I was going to be presenting to a full council today, but what I did want to submit on today was mainly around our characterisation in the priorities for water. Pure Bottling is a bottling company. We don't bottle water, but water is a large part of our ingredients that we use. It's our biggest component. We bottle for a large amount of New Zealand-based companies that are exporting to the world. We also use water for rinsing bottles, for cleaning, and for using as a processing aid for our machinery. And part of the reason I wanted to submit on this piece was I do understand now that existing large water users won't have to justify at the moment, but obviously down the track that may change. And getting in front of you today is only a positive thing for for our company. In terms of us being characterised as a large water user, we use around 5 or 6 times the characterisation as a large user, so we're using between 70 and 85,000 litres per day, and we don't really know how big we are versus the others out there. We've had no correspondence with the council on our water use at all before, so we don't really know. What we have had correspondence with the council on a lot is the trade waste side of it. we've got 40 to 50% of our inflow water going out to trade waste, and a lot of that water is pristine, clean drinking water. So we're working with the Regional Council on a Section 4B consent to discharge back to the water system and avoid the trade waste system, but that obviously comes at great cost. And so we are doing a lot of things as a business. I did think it was really important that I sat here today and sort of said, yeah, we're Pure Bottling, we're using a lot of water, but I don't know if that is a lot of water relative to the big users in the Tauranga area. I don't know, because that information is not available. But we want to stay in Tauranga. If we were to move sites, would that mean we're applying for a new one? Does this right carry with Pure Bottling, or does this carry with the site? Because currently our water rates is charged directly to our landlord who owns the site, not to Pure Bottling. The trade waste side is billed directly to Pure Bottling. So the question I have today is, are we large? Are we an issue? And if we were to move from one site to another within the Tauranga City Council area, would that become an issue for our large water usage access? So I don't know who can answer that. I don't know what state this is at, but yeah.
Thank you. Has that concluded your oral submission?
I don't know how to work the slides based on. Can I control it from here? Oh, okay. We'll do that first.
Because then perhaps through us we can address some of the questions afterwards.
Yep. So who are we? We're passionate. We're 100% New Zealand owned. We employ Kiwis. We produce Kiwi products. We export Kiwi products, and we help other Kiwi businesses promote New Zealand to the world. We're growing every year, and we're going to do that for the years to come, and we want to stay in Tauranga. So that's who we are. What do? We're a contract bottler and blender. We are not a water bottler. Our customers' products, we bring them to life, and they basically sell the product at a much higher margin. Basically we use locally trained staff in our production, quality and logistics teams. Since April, so on the current financial year for us to March, we've done 17 million bottles. And they've gone down our lines, and we've also blended 2.6 million litres of liquid feed for local beehives. So obviously a lot of you might not know, but liquid sugar is a crucial feed for bees and the apiculture industry. So we supply a large amount of that industry for the local hives around the Tauranga region. And we obviously, we've used 35 million litres of Tauranga City Council supplied water that's gone through our facility. And obviously we've got a consistent workforce of over 60. Who are our customers? Kamakoli, you might have heard of them. East Imperial, Good Buzz, Kombucha, Loaded Drinks. They're some of our key customers. A lot of them we can't tell you who they are because of confidentiality agreements, but these are our key big ones that we can tell you about. And really want to emphasise that the economic footprint of Pure Bottling is not just Pure Bottling, it's all of our customers, because we're a pure contract manufacturer. Why do we care about these bylaws? Obviously it's a critical ingredient, like it's our most critical ingredient. We use it for rinsing bottles, as I said, cleaning. It obviously goes on pretty much every single bottle we produce, and we also use it to be able to get the liquid in a state to be able to put it in the bottle, either by cooling or carbonating or pressurizing. We're characterised as a large user, but our characterisation in terms of priority would mean we're in either category 2 or category 3, meaning we're not the number 1. We felt it was important that you guys knew who we are. Cool. There you go. Time's up.
Thank you for that. Mr. Brooks raised a couple of questions, and I'm wondering whether staff have the information to hand to be able to answer them now, or perhaps get back to him later. Steve? Yeah.
Just in terms of the size of the operation, you said between 75 and 80,000 litres a day. Would put you with about 10 or 11 other big users in that category, but we've still got about another 9 or 10 that are even bigger than that. So that gives you a bit of an idea. Yep.
In terms of the other question, staff will respond back to you offline directly.
Thank you.
So thank you. Questions, Councillor Baldock.
Just to follow up with Steve, at 35 million litres a year, aren't we looking at the problem line is 50 million litres used per day at the moment with our restrictions? Am I correct? So that's almost 1 day's usage of water for the whole city, is it?
Yeah, at the moment we our 7-day rolling average, we start putting the sprinkler restriction level, the very low level restrictions in when we exceed that 7-day average for a period of time, and yeah, that gives you an idea of but typically our production average through the year is at about 40 million.
Councillor Robson.
Yeah, slightly obscure question, but through you, Chair, to staff. What's the evaporation loss of swimming pools water across Tauranga in summer? And I asked a serious question I was contemplating before, and I asked the question about targeting particular activities or industries, and I noticed we have a sprinkler ban, yet there's nothing stops me topping up my pool, which is evaporating, 20 square meters of pool loses a lot of water every day in the middle of summer. Can someone do we have a number on that? Do we know where the water, I suppose crew question, it's a lot of water disappearing from a lot of pools compared to some of these big users, activities, in other words, is swimming pools collectively, private swimming pools collectively, an activity area we should be looking at?
So Steve might want to add this further, but private swimming pools are in stage 2 of escalation, so we're currently at a sprinkler ban, and private swimming pools would be not available to the public at stage 3. Steve, perhaps you want to cover a little bit more about what makes the difference between moving from the sprinkler ban that we've got now into the next level of restrictions. So what change in volume of usage does it need to get to trigger onto that next level? And within that, you can shift some of those things into the sprinkler ban. It's just a decision that was made about actually starting to stage this and asking the community to accept a level of reduction in terms of availability of water and how that might escalate over time.
I think you've answered it really well. I think the intent of staged restrictions is that very first stage of sprinkler ban is a very modest level. It doesn't impinge on most people's day-to-day life. The next level up, which would be a hose pipe ban, so that's external use of hose pipes. That's quite severe on most people because they have other activities that they would have to put off. So the trigger level for that is where we have 7 days of continuous demand at excess of between 55 and 60 megalitres a day of demand, and no forecast rain in the near future. So we're trying to work within those, but it is quite a big step up from sprinkler to hose ban.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Brooks. Do you have a follow-up, Councillor Robson?
Just looking for clarification about swimming pools as an activity. When you look at Ingham's and Feed and the activities, swimming pools as an activity, what's the water consumption there? It's just, where does it sit?
I did look at Mr. Google, and it said that you lose about half your water in 1 year. So if you've got a 25,000 gallon pool, you lose half of that a year in evaporation. But that was just Mr. Google. I'm not sure how accurate that is. And then you'd have to multiply that out by the size of swimming pools in the whole area, but it's probably reasonably substantial.
Okay. Look, thank you, Mr. Brooks, for your submission, which has, of course, triggered a few more questions from my colleagues to staff. So colleagues will be deliberating on your submission and others and taking that into consideration when we make some decisions on the policy. But we'll also get back to you on the question you asked too. So thank you for your time. Okay, colleagues, we move to the next section of business, which is the verbal update from our Bay of Plenty Regional Councillor, Paula Thompson, on environmental matters. Thank you, Councillor Paula.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Happy New Year to you all. The highlight for us today will be a presentation by Rhys Irving. Rhys, you've met before. He is a senior regional regulatory project manager, and he'll be giving you an update today on Mount Maunganui air matters. But before Rhys comes forward to do the presentation, I did want to update you on a number of matters. The first thing I want to throw out there is that I want to acknowledge the opportunity to serve on this committee, but I have to throw out the challenge to us and say, how are we doing in terms of this cross-pollination, this cross-communication, this working together? Is this really, you know, we tried last year to pitch some presentations in terms of this is what the Regional Council does, because we know that not a lot of people know what the Regional Council does. But I'm going to put it out there to maybe the Chief Executive and maybe the Chief Executive of the Regional Council to say, are we doing this to the best of our abilities? I don't know whether we are. I don't know what value you and the public are gaining from this. Can we do it better? Are there ways in which that cross-pollination and communication can in fact work better? I certainly have a few personal ideas, but I won't share them with you now. So what I wanted to do, if I could, is to update you on the agenda for the Regional Direction and Delivery Committee, which is the committee I chair of the Council, and it is the Council's regulatory and non-regulatory policy committee. And it's being held tomorrow. The agenda's all online, and there are some interesting topics that I wanted to update you on. So firstly, at 9:30, we're having the annual reports from the University of Waikato chairs in freshwater and in coastal marine. And they will be interesting reports in terms of their progress, in terms of their particular domains of freshwater and coastal marine science. So if anybody hasn't got anything better to do at 9:30, I'd like to welcome you along to that meeting. Another item that you might find of some interest is a report on the Regional Waste and Resource Efficiency Strategy, which is a strategy that's been in place since 2013. And there is, as a result of that strategy, a Waste Reduction Advisory Group, which has also been in operation since 2013. And the Regional Council felt that it was timely to actually review progress against both the strategy and, in fact, the advisory group. And there's a comprehensive independent report that's been done on the success or otherwise, or ways to improve this. And what occurs to me, and on the Waste Resources Advisory Group, Tauranga City Council is represented, as is Whakatane District and other TLAs, as well as the Waikato Regional Council. But I think it is very timely that this review takes place, and basically the question being asked is, does the Regional Council have a role to play in the sandpit in terms of an overarching strategy for the region, and being in a position to perhaps coordinate and facilitate innovations, data gathering, etc. in the waste space. Now, you will be aware that obviously TLAs are heavily involved in the waste space, and that doesn't sound quite right, does it? But as is indeed BOPLAS. So it is a timely opportunity for us to say, does the Regional Council have a role? And what the report is recommending is that if it does, then it needs to be prepared to throw some more resources at it. So again, that's just, I'm highlighting for you something else that may be of interest on our agenda tomorrow. Plan change 13, the air quality plan change is up for adoption or otherwise at our meeting tomorrow. Obviously, I can't say whether it's going to be adopted or not, but I'm suggesting that we give you a thorough update at our the next meeting of this Tauranga City Council Environment Committee. Another very comprehensive report on tomorrow's agenda is in fact the overview of wastewater in the Bay of Plenty region. And as you will be aware, there are 16 municipal wastewater treatment plants across the region, and a comprehensive audit has been done in terms of performance of those wastewater treatment systems. I note that you'll be pleased to know that Tauranga City fully complied with its 2018 performance against its consent last year, but that is a very interesting read in terms of what is a strategic issue for the Bay of Plenty in terms of the wastewater space. You know that the government has got its Three Waters review underway at the present time, particularly around not only fresh water but a focus on the performance of wastewater, and has asked regional councils across the country to work with it in terms of some of the issues around consenting. So the Three Waters review, I think Christine is due to report back later in this year, but a very big strategic issue facing the Bay of Plenty. Other matters of moment relate to the freshwater space. I take it that you councillors have all seen this latest essential freshwater work that's underway at the moment. There's a task force in place working with government, beavering away in terms of the new minister's objectives. So the regional council's in the throes, as I've said before, of implementing the current national policy statement for freshwater. Divided the region up into 9 water management areas. We've got until 2030 to agree with communities, including Tangata Whenua, on what water quality objectives they want to achieve and how water is to be allocated more fairly. We've started work in the Rangataiki water management area and the Kaituna Pongakawa. And relevant to today's discussion around science and evidence, a lot of very good work is being done in the science and evidence space, and the next meeting of the Kaituna Pongakawa freshwater users group or stakeholders group will be discussing some of that science. It's really, really interesting stuff. I know your staff are involved with those. I don't know how much information you get on that. So that's what we're currently doing. We're heads down, you know what up, focusing on those areas. In the meantime, along has come this new freshwater work, and the Minister wants 3 areas focused on. He wants to stop the degradation now, he wants to reverse past damage, and he wants to address how we actually allocate water more fairly. There's a task force in place as we speak. Chairman Leader is a part of that task force, and they are busy beavering away in this space. It is our World Cup game. For the Regional Council, it's our World Cup game. This is what we are really, really focused on. So tomorrow we're going to be getting an update in that freshwater space, and I just wanted to, if I may, sorry to hold you up, highlight another few interesting bits and pieces. Sorry, Mr. Chairman, should be better prepared than this. Forgive me, I just need page 2. Page 263, that's just to show you how much we've got to get through tomorrow. Okay, so in terms of Plan Change 9, that's the current water allocation plan change. There have now been, how many appeals have been lodged? 25, I beg your pardon, 14 appeals and 25 Section 274 party have also lodged. It's a biggie. It's I mean, this is how we allocate water across the region, as you know, huge work. Talked about Kaituna. You don't need to know, that's all. Moving on from that. Sorry, Reese, I'm holding you up. There is further national work being done on the protection of highly productive soils. Clearly the Western Bay and Tauranga City will be impacted in terms of any further national environmental standard that comes out there. And the good news is Tauranga sea lettuce wasn't such a problem this year. And there is a study currently nearing completion. It's called the Tauranga, maybe the sea lettuce report. It's about 2 weeks away. It was an initiative with the University of Waikato, and we can present on the findings of that report to your next meeting. And I think, Mr. Chairman, if I might just, as Reese comes forward to take his place, I'm just going to make a couple of comments. Mount Maunganui air issues are a very, very significant matter, obviously for community and for both councils. Obviously, numerous activities taking place in the Mount Maunganui industrial area. And as you know, just to repeat, that we've moved from having 3 monitors in that space to having 12 monitors rather. The point that I do need to make is that analysing and being able to determine the precise source of the contaminant is difficult. So and Rhys will go into this in some detail, but contaminants, be it dust or SO2 or the rest of them, they are sometimes very difficult to be able to hone it back to which activity is causing which particular contaminant. But I did want to, for Councillor Stewart's benefit, there is the meeting of the Methyl Bromide Community Action Group on the 28th of February, Councillor Stewart, so just to remind you of that. So without further ado, Rhys will now blow your lights out with a stunning presentation, and he'll answer all your questions. Thanks, Rhys.
No pressure at all. Thank you, Councillor Thompson, Mr Chair and councillors. So this afternoon, just a fairly brief presentation to update the committee on the current state of air quality issues that we're facing in the Mount Industrial area. And what we have found is a few trends since the Regional Council instigated the additional air quality monitoring. The additional 11 or 12 monitoring stations were all operative by October last year. So this is kind of just an update on our findings since they came online last year. We're going to focus just on an overview of the port and Mount Industrial area as we define it, the monitoring systems that we have in place constantly, and the breaches or exceedances. The words are kind of used interchangeably, although have quite different meanings under the National Environmental Standards. So we'll look at exceedances and breaches of the ambient air quality limits. And those breaches focus on dust and particulate and sulfur dioxide gas, the key discharges that are controlled by the National Environmental Standard. So when we think of the Port of Tauranga and the Mount Industrial area, we're pretty much talking about the port land being the main shipping wharves and of course the Sulphur Point container terminal. We're talking some 90 hectares in area of land. Separate from this, we think about the Mount Industrial area, another 80 or so hectares in total. There are some port-owned sites within this, but a lot of it is private business and industry. And bordering both the port and the Mount Industrial area, we have, of course, the recreational area of Blake Park and the residential area of central Mount Maunganui, and in the south, the residents and the community based around the Whareroa Marae. This is where we often get a bit of a clash of culture, I guess, with recreational and residential in close proximity to these industrial areas and places where there are lots of consented and permitted activity discharges occurring. So traditionally and originally, the Regional Council had 3 air quality monitoring stations. Our oldest one is at the bottom of this slide, that is on Totara Street, and that has been in place for 7 or 8 years now. Then behind, or the one at the top centre, is the Harbour Bridge Marina. That was put in place purely to detect particulate matter, dust and sulphur dioxide gas. And then the one on the green space is at the Whareroa Marae. That has now, it's in its 3rd year located at the Marae, and that has increased quite dramatically the number of different air emission parameters that we take into account at that one. So we are getting quite specific. Recently put PM10, the fine dust particulate monitor in there to see if they're being affected, as well as hydrogen sulfide, sulfur dioxide, and a wide range of meteorological data is collected at that monitoring station. This slide, I think, also just gives an indication of the types of activities that are going on with the very large log yards, obviously at the port, and the large roofs of the Balance Agri-Fert plant just below the harbour bridge there. Next to Balance, which has a consented sulphur dioxide discharge, and right next door is the Waste Management Oil Refinery, another consented sulphur dioxide discharge, and right on the left-hand edge of this picture you might be able to see a plume of discharge coming from a chimney stack that is Laughter. So basically lined up right along the boundary of Whareroa Marae are the three major sulphur dioxide discharge contributions in the industrial area. So we have put on these additional monitoring stations. We've almost ring-fenced the port to a degree with a line of 6 new stations running down Totara Street. These are for a variety of different discharge parameters. Excuse me. They include PM10 or the fine particulate. There are some that are specifically looking at volatile organics or picking up methyl bromide if that is in the air. We also have sulfur dioxide gas, and then there is a cluster of 3 discharge stations or 3 monitoring stations out on the right-hand side of this picture, just north of Tauranga Airport, and that's at what we call 101 Aerodrome Road or De Havilland Way. So I'll go into a little bit of detail about what has been occurring at that site as we progress through the slideshow. So we have detected, since the new PM10 monitors have been in place, 3 breaches of the NES for PM10. PM10 is the fine particulate, which I sound like I've got stuck in my throat at the moment. And we have had 2 breaches of this NES standard at Aerodrome Road. Now, under the National Environmental Standard for Air Quality, there is 1 allowable exceedance of the 50 microgram limit in a 12-month period. Excuse me. So as you can see, we've had, in fairly quick succession, we've had a total of 5 exceedances. Well, once you've exceeded once, everything else after that is known as a breach of the standard. So we have got these breaches of the standard that we are currently investigating. Just a little bit more about the Whareroa location, where 3 of the exceedances or breaches have occurred. And basically, we've got to look at a wide range of different activities. As Councillor Thompson pointed out, it is very difficult to be specific on source. So we have to take in wind direction, wind speed, the type of activities that were occurring at a specific time of day, etc. We also, as you'll see later on, we get a physical sample of the air dust collected in these monitoring stations. So we're able to analyse those samples to give us a little bit of a better idea of where those dust particles might be coming from. But we do know that Whareroa, particularly on a northwesterly wind, that is a wind which comes off the harbour and over the Balance site, generally is a period of time when we do detect breaches or exceedances at the Whareroa Marae. So we've got a fairly clear line heading in that northwesterly direction. At Whareroa, on the extreme right of this photo, the white box is the air monitoring station that is located right next to the Wharenui, and in the background of this photograph you can see the roof of the Balance site there. So that's just to give an idea of the proximity of the marae and the monitoring station. This monitoring station is located directly in front of the marae kohanga rail, so there is often quite a lot of concern about the effect of discharges in this area on the young children who are attending the Whareroa kohanga rail. This is an example of the air quality monitoring ribbon that is kept within the station. So every 8 hours a dot is created, and this dot is created by taking a sample of particulate every 10 minutes and stamping it on this ribbon paper. And then that builds up after 8 hours. So a 24-hour period is identified by 3 dots on the paper. And this is the paper ribbon that gets sent off for electron microscope analysis. So from that paper ribbon, we're able to get a example such as this. The long strands, of course, are the paper highly magnified, and the little particles are the PM10, or the fine dust particles. These are the particles known in the NES to be what we have to control, because they do enter the human lung and they are the cause of chronic lung diseases. From these, we're able to get our scientists to look at these particles and go through a library of electron microscope particles that we have and do a visual identification and comparison, trying to determine if these particles are from a specific type of dust, from a specific source. We know that, for instance, tyre rubber has a specific look, a specific shape and size, as does combustion from an engine, for instance, the way a combustion particle looks. We know that dust from palm kernel has a specific look to it. So we're able to determine whether these particles are predominantly from one source. Unfortunately, what we generally tend to find is they are from a huge range of different sources, which is why we have that difficulty pinpointing exactly what is going to be the single cause, when a single cause is hard to determine because dust is coming from so many sources, particularly in this dry summer. So we have many different dust creating activities resulting from work that goes on the Port of Tauranga. We are working with the port and with the activity operators on that port, be they shipping operators, the stevedores who unload the cargo from the ship, the cleaning companies that do the sweeping, and of course the Port of Tauranga management, to try and implement a very broad range of different controls back, but so yeah, basically we have undertaken an independent dust source audit, so that helped us identify all of those sources from the Port of Tauranga and activities undertaken there. Now that's going back some 18 months or so, so we've been instigating the recommendations of that audit over a relatively long period of time, and we are making good progress, but certainly people tell us there is a lot more progress that's possible to be made with what we're doing there. So we continue with that. We now have John Morris, one of our senior regulatory compliance officers. He's permanently based in an office that we have created at the Port of Tauranga, so we have permanent staff now over there keeping an eye on things. Many other sources, of course, transportation of goods throughout the Mount industrial area. The soil and bark from logging trucks, sealed and unsealed yards are going to be a big focus this year. We still have some very large unsealed yards that have a lot of heavy traffic movement on them around the Mount. Vehicle emissions in manufacturing, industrial, commercial processes, etc. All of these things are potential sources of air emissions. And apart from that, the sea is one of the greatest natural sources of particulate emission. Salt evaporation off seawater causes a huge amount of particulate in the air, so we've got that to contend with at the same time. So 101 Aerodrome Road, this is off to Haviland Way, eastern end to the north side of Tauranga Airport. This is a very large complex of dry bulk storage sheds. Dry bulk storage, primarily I'm talking about stock food, and the Port of Tauranga is New Zealand's largest stock food importation centre. We bring in a huge quantity of grains, tapioca and palm kernel in particular. Now this is around 5 kilometres distant from the berths of the Port of Tauranga, so everything that gets stored in the shed, which is really a transshipment point for this product, comes off the ship, it gets trucked to this shed, and then from this shed it gets trucked on further to individual farmers as per their orders and requirements. What we've got here is that immediately to the south of the shed is that long rectangular building, which are private aircraft hangars for aircraft enthusiasts, and each one of those has a residential apartment on top. So most of these people live above their hangar, and their apartments face directly onto the bulk dry storage complex. Not the greatest situation, as of course they're elevated, they get to see over the fence of the complex, so they get to witness, I guess, the constant truck movements and the loading and offloading of the dry bulk product that's coming in, which undoubtedly is quite a dusty process at times. The start of this dusty process could be from the actual unloading of the ship, so this is where the trucks are coming in to take that bulk product. In this case it is palm kernel being unloaded, and unfortunately it's something that we see all too often, is this type of event during unloading or transferring the bulk product from the ship through a hopper and into the truck. It is a dusty process and it needs great care and skill from the crane operator in order to ensure that dust discharges such as this are not occurring. Moving on to the other key contaminant that we've had in breach of the National Environmental Standard is sulfur dioxide, and this is a byproduct of various industrial processes that we have going on: fertilizer manufacture, fuel refining, burning, and also shipping emissions. The discharge of sulfur dioxide is controlled by resource consents in general. Well, certainly at the Port of Tauranga, at the 3 key discharges, all consented discharges, and they are controlled to ensure that their consent should ensure they remain within the National Environmental Standard. The issue that we have potentially is that the 3 sulfur dioxide discharges in Maumaunganui are all neighbours, and so we have a collective event, and all of their consents are currently being reviewed in light of the breaches of the National Environmental Standard that we've been experiencing. So if we look at some of the monitoring results that we have achieved, this is looking at sulfur dioxide last year, and basically these windroses are just telling the story excuse me, telling that story about wind direction and the effect that it has on the amount of sulfur dioxide detected. So the higher the level of sulfur dioxide, obviously the redder the colour. When it's purple or light blue, it means we have a very, very low level of sulfur dioxide detection. So you can see right in the south, or the bottom windrows here, obviously that is Whareroa Marae, and a clear direction on that northwesterly wind coming in over Balance. We can see that Balance is one of those key consented discharges of sulfur dioxide, and likely, or I think without doubt in this case, that when the wind is coming in that direction, we are detecting a high level of sulfur dioxide. To the left of that, at the marina, the higher levels of sulfur dioxide are pointing virtually straight up the harbour, and you can see upstream next to the graph a ship in port, and we believe that it's likely shipping emissions that we are detecting at the Tauranga Harbour Bridge Marina. And then the upper wind graph here, you can see that it's when we've got a southwesterly wind, the higher levels of sulfur dioxide are detected. And again, they are pointing quite strongly in the direction of Balance Agri-Nutrients and the other consented sulfur dioxide discharges, all in a cluster at the bottom of the southern end of the Mount Industrial area. So this is just kind of how we can use the technology for gas to try and determine where the source is, which seems to be a bit clearer cut than it is with dust and particulate matter. The last part of this presentation is just to do with shipping emissions, because it's a little bit of the elephant in the room with the Regional Council, and shipping emissions are an anomaly in that Regional Council or the RMA gives us no powers to have control over shipping emissions while ships are in port. So we have recently had 4 breaches or 4 exceedances of the NES for sulphur dioxide at our new monitoring station in Rata Street. Now, this monitoring station was located specifically to line up perfectly with the cruise ship berths, where they berth on berths 1, 2 and 3 at the Port of Tauranga. This monitoring station is approximately 250 metres due west of the cruise ship berths, and each of these discharge events were detected on days when cruise ships were in port, and a cruise ship in port has to run its engines obviously to maintain power supply for all of the activities that cruise passengers require, but they are sitting there idling their engines for 12 hours or whatever period of time they are in port. And it's just, I think, something that is a concern for us, that we don't have any way to control or limit these emissions. And I'm not just pointing the finger at cruise ships, because cruise ships are a very small number, but they do tend to be in port with their engines going because they've got to cater to the needs of such a large number of people on board. So we had 3 breaches of the 350 microgram standard. Now, you're allowed 9 breaches or 9 exceedances of this per year, but we breached the 570 microgram limit once on the 24th of January, and that's a never breach this limit standard. So that means that we have had to go to the Ministry for the Environment to inform them of this breach and also publicly notify in the local newspapers. Just a little bit of look. As I said, we're not pointing the finger solely at the cruise ships, but just the growth in cargo ship visits between 91 and 2017. This comes from the Port of Tauranga website. So a fairly steady growth in cargo ship visits, and I think if we extrapolated that out to 2019, we would see quite a large jump further. But we've also gone in the last 5 years from some 70 cruise ship visits to over 120 this summer season. So, and that's set to increase again next year. So that's a growing, obviously from our point of view, emission issue that we're going to have to deal with going forward. So shipping emissions, we don't have any ability to control them under the RMA. They are controlled via MARPOL, or the Marine Pollution Convention, the International Convention for Prevention of Pollution from Ships. New Zealand did not sign up to the Annex 6 of this convention, which was the air pollution annex, giving local governments around the world the ability to impose controls on shipping emissions. The reason New Zealand didn't sign this annex was because the annex was written in 1978, and shipping in New Zealand was considered to be a minor player in international transport in 1978. There wasn't the populations that there are today living near our ports, and it was simply something that we never signed to. Annex 6 is currently open for signatory nations to rejoin this year, and so we have recently submitted to the Ministry of Transport, or the New Zealand Transport Authority, that we strongly would applaud and welcome the New Zealand government finally signing Annex 6, which, as I say, has been around since 1978. The ports of Auckland have commissioned a study into cruise ship discharges, and they are very much looking at providing a shore power facility So most cruise ships carry the ability to plug into electricity. Obviously they do require a fair amount of voltage to run while they're in port, but a lot of ports around the world provide an electrical connection so that cruise ships can go on mains power and not have to run their fuel burning engines when they're in port. We also have the option of fuel switching, so ensuring that that these cruise ships go to a low sulfur fuel, and indeed in 2020 there is going to be an international convention on dropping the amount of sulfur permitted in shipping fuels from 3.5%, so that should make quite a difference in itself. And just where we're going from here, we have increased the number of staff working on these issues. We have set up a new group within the Regional Council of all of the different teams who work on air quality issues at the Port of Tauranga. So we've got a much broader umbrella approach to it. We are looking at additional discharges and how they can be controlled better through the consenting process. Stronger enforcement action has been undertaken. Management tools such as declaring and airshed, which is something that we have in our power, or we can recommend certainly to MFE that we would like an airshed to be gazetted to further control the mount area. We've got the emissions of entry being undertaken at the moment, so we can know every single source of emission that we have in the area. We've increased our number of air monitoring sites with the potential that in 12 months' time, if more are deemed to be required, that could be something we undertake. And of course, our 24-hour complaints hotline is where the majority of our knowledge of air quality issues is coming to us from, so we continue to monitor that. And that's the end of me. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Irving. A couple of questions from me, if you're happy to take them. I can see your hand there. Thank you, Councillor Mason. First one is, does the Port of Tauranga provide a shore power facility?
No.
No. Okay. Second one is with regard to that the particulate matter, the PM10. What are the consequences of being found to be in breach of that? What tools are available to you as an enforcement organisation?
So the consequences or the regulatory consequences at the moment, legislative consequence, is that we've got to notify. That's really the only consequence at the moment. We have to notify the government and we have to notify the public. But from our regulatory consequence, obviously, we want to get to the bottom of the cause of the breach or the cause of the accident. So it's the investigation that that flows on from detecting an accident to try and determine the source. Now, to date, we've only confirmed the source of one of the discharges in De Havilland Way or in 101 Aerodrome Drive. So the outcome of that was to impose an abatement notice on the transporting company who we deemed to be responsible for that the breach on that particular occasion.
Thanks, Rhys. That was fascinating. So a major driver in our community around the mountain.
There certainly we've had Toi Toyota involved, and they believe that one of the occupants in De Havilland Way, one of the people who lives in one of the apartments, who has pronounced bronchial disease, they believe that long-term exposure to particulate matter is likely to be a contributing factor in his illness. But certainly World Health Organization has determined that chronic exposure or long-term exposure to particulate matter, 10 microns or smaller, PM10 as it's called, is a carcinogen. It causes, it contributes to or causes lung cancers, throat cancers and those type of issues for long-term exposure.
I imagine if this gets to the courts, and somebody had the council had to take a prosecution out against an emitter, it would be pretty difficult with the current science if to show certain emissions being exceeded or breached, but the actual impacts on individuals, I imagine, would be quite hard. I'm just trying to get an idea of sort of where
I think that's true. I mean, we've also got to take into account the 101 Aerodrome Road site, for instance. It's only been moving stock feed through there for about 8 years. So whilst Toitiwara Public Health has deemed that they believe the person who's lived on that site, has been affected, I don't think 8 years exposure is certainly going to stand up if you're trying to say you're a definite, you are the definite cause, or this is the definite cause of this person's respiratory illness. So it's something that's going to be very difficult to pinpoint on a single emitter or a single source, that's for sure.
Through the chair, Paula, thank you very much for your comprehensive report, and also Reece. And I wondered, Reece, through the chair, if you could leave a copy of that with us. The slides.
Yep, it's on your system.
It's on our objective or Stella. Thank you. That's really good. Has the Regional Council done a stock take on all the consents held within that area that you showed us on the maps?
By stock take, what do you mean exactly?
You're aware of when they are renewed, when they come up again, the dates of expiry, etc.
So basically, dust is generally being considered a permitted activity. So very few dust emitting sites have a consent specifically for dust. Under the permitted activity rules, they've got to have dust controls in place, and so that's generally what we rely on there. So the consented activities that we are controlling are typically gas discharges, so the sulfur dioxide, hydrogen sulfide, etc. And we have done a comprehensive stock take of when all of those are due for review or for renewal. And as I said, the three main sulfur dioxide discharging consents are all under review at the moment because of the breaches of the National Environmental Standard.
And with the Plan Change 13, can we expect to see some recommendations in there that as a result of what you've talked
Certainly, Plan Change 13 specifically outlines a large number of industrial types or activity types which will no longer be permitted. They will be a discretionary activity and require consent under the new plan change.
And finally, I'd just, through the chair, like to thank Councillor Thompson for advocating for those extra monitoring stations. I think that's really helpful going forward. So thank you for the detail.
Yeah, I'll add my comments to Councillor Thompson too for the report today, which I think is very, very disturbing. Can you go back to earlier slide where you showed the first monitoring stations? Had the three on it, you know. Yeah, there we go. Yep. So you said they were installed 7 to 8 years ago, yeah, 3, but then you talked about Whareroa being done 3 years ago.
So yeah, so the first one that we put in is the one bottom central. That's what we call our Totara Street site. If you've ever travelled down there, it's the biggest monitoring site that we have. It's all branded with Regional Council, and I think it's "We're here to care for the air" or something written on the side of that. So that's about 8 years in place. Whareroa 3 years ago, and the Harbour Bridge Marina 2 years ago.
It begs the question, doesn't it? Why has it taken so long to have a monitoring station installed near Whareroa? I mean, it's not like they got invented 3 years ago. And they are exposed to 3 of the major polluters there. And we only now get data, and the data shows that there are breaches. God knows how many breaches have occurred over the past 20 years when the Regional Council should have been doing its job. And the impression that you haven't been doing your job because you are a major the majority shareholder of the port, is hard to get rid of when we see this kind of data, isn't it, Reece?
I think that's
Honestly.
possibly
And
beyond the scope of a regulatory
Well,
officer.
it does lead us to a question from this committee. I know Councillor Thompson said we should be working better together, and I think it's time we did so, because these things are very serious for everybody in our city, and we don't have the power. We don't do this monitoring. It is the Regional Council. It's been in place since 1989, and I'm just flabbergasted today that we get this information. I'll move on to my next question, please, to the Aerodrome Road site, please. Can you go to the one you showed, just so we can all see it in our minds? Yep. Now, you made comments about the residential living above the hangars. It is sort of abnormal in that you are in an industrial area, but I hope we don't focus on that, because there are lots of Tauranga residents working in those areas who don't live there, but they're still there every day working, and they are exposed to these particles. And as you say, one guy there is quite seriously sick from it. So I applaud the fact you're now monitoring there. This has been going, they've been there for 8 years. People have been able to see the mess there, and it has taken far too long to get this data. So I applaud you that you're there now. But I hope we really get into this, because they have been complaining for at least 5 years about what they can see with their eyes, and the Regional Council has not been taking them seriously until I think Councillor Thompson started to push it along. So thank you.
I just so with the site, our monitoring stations, I acknowledge that they had been complaining for quite a period of time. So the monitoring stations have been there for coming up 2 years now, and it's the first breaches were detected in January. So we simply didn't pick up anything untoward there until January this year.
But aren't there problems with the breach levels, that they have to be consistent over 24-hour periods? You know, if you can stand there and watch the stuff coming, and you can wipe it off your hangar door, yes, the monitoring is an important part for the legality, but it is obvious that they are discharging particulate that is not compliant. And can I ask you, the evidence about the particulate of the husks, or this product, is particularly dangerous for aluminium. And so here we are next to an airport with aeroplanes made out of aluminium, and this stuff, which has the potential to rust it, sort of, erode it. We ought to have been onto this a lot earlier.
Just before Councillor Currick, I'd just remind colleagues that under the RMA, territorial authorities also have responsibility for air quality. We are also responsible for ensuring the implementation of Regional Council's rules in air quality, and we also have within our gift, for want of a better term, the ability to make bylaws about air quality. And so as Councillor Thompson was reminding us that we need to work together better at the beginning of the day, I think that it is valuable to remember that we, as in the City Council, also have a regulatory role here, which we are able to undertake should we provide the leadership and do that. It is not just Regional Council's responsibility. Thank you. Councillor Currick.
On to that.
No, thank you. I hear everything that has been said, and I can only speak for myself and my colleagues, but we are deeply concerned about this issue. I identified that the air quality in Tauranga is now a strategic issue for the Regional Council. So, we're taking, I hear what you said about it seems to have taken an inordinate amount of time. It's on our desk, but can I please give an example of maybe your environment strategy, as I've been trying to say, needs to hold the regional council's feet to the fire in terms of those responsibilities, and Vicky Verka. So, you know, we need to move to an arrangement whereby we understand each other's roles and responsibilities, and we're going to say, here's what we expect of each other, you know. And I've been, you know, we can come along and give these, and Reese, that was a fantastic presentation, thank you. But I think we're now moving into where we need to just, you know, get a bit more disciplined in terms of our expectations of one another, and really move into that. This is a big issue. Sorry, it's a strategic issue in the Mount Maunganui industrial area, but, you know, I have to say there's other areas around the city that I think we need to be equally focused on. So let's do this.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Our residents certainly deserve it. Councillor Curake.
Yeah, thank you, Reese. But in terms of the health impacts and steps being taken to prevent the emissions, and thinking about the Whareroa Marae and the Kohanga-Reo there, I understood that in response to those impacts on the children there, that Balance installed some into their stacks some mitigating what do you call it, scrubbers or whatever in these stacks. Is it still, are those particulates still being emitted from Balance?
So, following on from the emissions, that the breaches of the National Environmental Standard sulphur dioxide that occurred 2.5 years ago, not long after the Whareroa Marae monitoring station was installed, Balance undertook $8 million worth of capital improvements, and we haven't detected any breaches from that air quality monitoring station since that time. So everything we thought the investment by Balance had done its duty, had done its job, but just now, and whether it's this particularly dry summer that we have had, or whether the type of management at the Balance site has changed somewhat, I'm not sure. We're certainly investigating to find out what has occurred, because after 2.5 or more than 2.5 years with no exceedances, why suddenly are we seeing these right on that northwest wind line? You know, when the wind is coming over Balance, we get this quick succession of exceedances occurring again. So, yeah.
Just to clarify, the circular graph, that was all on recent data. So how recent are we talking about?
Councillor Thompson.
Just wanted to make one other comment, and it related to Councillor Mason's point. Tuiti Ora need also to be in the mix here. So when I say let's have good expectations, let's actually work with Tuiti Ora as well in terms of those expectations.
I'll leave the final question to Mr. Kawe. Councillor Granger, we have a council meeting set down for 3:30. If any further questions are able to be brief, that would be appreciated. But
thanks, Mr. Chair.
Peel first.
Yes. I had my hand up half an hour ago.
Kia ora tātou. Yeah, where to begin? Where to begin? You know, I think it just vindicates what our kaumātua and kuia were saying in Wharero. It is an absolute disgrace that it took us this long to recognise, to put in those actions in the last 3 years. What about the last 50 years? You know, we all take responsibility for that. But it absolutely vindicates the kōrero that they had around what was happening at that site. And there has to be something more than just a report going up. So this information has to go out to Wharero, and I hope you're taking that to them. There needs to be some opportunity for both councils to be going to Whareroa with an apology and about what you're going to do next. It just can't lie in this room. So we're talking around this collaborative approach around moving forward on actions. Here's a serious, proven, science behind it. These people didn't ask for Balance to come and be their neighbours. They didn't ask for anybody to be their neighbour over there. Yet they have suffered clearly from the discharges that have been happening from that particular site and any other new site that has come about and been established in that area. I know we had that hui, I was at a hui at Whareroa where this particular issue was raised. And it's taken us that long to get somewhere down the track to coming up with this science behind it, making the changes to the stacks, and whatever the cost was, $8 million for the number of people who've been living in those kaumātua units, for those that have been living in those whare next to the marae, and those that have been living there since the marae has been there, all the way back to the time of Hori Tupaia, the first residents that were on there, living on that site before the port came along. And then we've had this industrial issue and these consequences of those stacks on that community. So I hand it over to you, Mr. Chair. Where do we go now?
Thank you, Mr. Kawe. So, I mean, the question really is, within that, how is this information communicated to the community at Whareroa, and how is the ongoing dialogue around the polluters' responsibility going forward communicated back to them? Would that be a fair summation, Mr. Kawe?
Yeah, no, that's it. I think it is. You know, the chair, CE, the mayor, the opportunity to actually take this information to them, and where do we go next? And those discussions with Balance.
Chair. So thank you. I acknowledge the kōrero and the concerns. However, there has been a considerable amount of communication, liaison and collaboration with the Whareroa Marae. But what I would like to do is this is coming up at our meeting tomorrow, and I will convey the deep concerns of this council through this committee as have been expressed, and I will be seeking a resolution that these matters be pursued. I think what's really important is that we get some facts presented in front of this committee in terms of, you know, the length of time that it may or may not have taken to actually be addressing these issues, the complexity of matters around the causal nexus between exceedances and actual evidence relating to impacts on human health. So if you would be good enough to leave raising your concerns with me at the committee that I chair tomorrow, and we will certainly come back through this committee with a clear action plan in terms of what has been done, why the time frames, and what is intended to be done. So if you'd be good enough to leave that with me, I will certainly progress it.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. You've heard the words around the table, and you'll be able to express the concern. Thank you. Councillor Granger, finally. Oh, Mayor all right. Yeah. No, we'll let Councillor Granger go first, and then Your Worship.
Before I do ask a question, I'd certainly want to thank Pio Kawe for sharing his concerns. I totally support him. Thank you, Councillor Baldock, for doing the same. I'm quite shocked today to have heard what I have heard. I do want to ask one question though. Can we go to that little strip of tape that you had out there before? and the comments you made in regards to how often you do that and what it tells you, but you cannot say that it's a particular source, because you said there's many sources. So what are you going to do, and how are you going to address that?
That's the $1 million question in some ways, but it's really, we've got to look holistically at all of the activity types that are being undertaken in this particular area. So we're looking at it geographically, and we're looking at it as a whole and saying, ultimately, everybody's got to do better. Everybody who is producing a discharge within the Mount Industrial area, including the Port of Tauranga, has got to improve the way they operate.
Yeah, but that to me is too vague. You know, you've got to ping those that are causing the most. And I know it's going to be very difficult, but how can you say overall you've got to do something? To me, it's just not good enough. You've got to start pinging those that are major problem problems. And to me, it's whether you have to have more of these devices in around to sort that problem out. I think that's what should be done. I don't want to go in and half pie. And our concern today, and it's been shared, and Paul has taken that on hand, we've got to do something, but do it right.
And I think, I mean, the approach that we're taking at the moment, we've identified log yards and log movements as one of the biggest cause of dust pollution. So we're working very closely with Kaingaroa Timberlands, one of the largest log exporters at the port. They're investing some $12 million in New Zealand's largest log debarker located in Murupara, which is being constructed at the moment. So they hope to mitigate their discharges by only shipping debarked logs out of New Zealand, which means that all of that product won't be falling on the ground. We are reviewing the consents for Laughter and Balance right as we speak. So they are the biggest discharges of sulfur dioxide gases in the Mount, so we're specifically targeting those two as the biggest operators there. And we've got a really key focus this year on the largest of the unsealed sites that are dotted throughout the industrial area. So they're just the traffic movements on unsealed sites causes the suspension of a lot of dust, and so we're working with those in the short term. So we are facing that challenge, I guess, with the biggest sites over the next 12 months.
Thank you. We'll hear from Mayor Brownless, and then that'll have to be it, colleagues.
Yeah, just wondering if I mean, this has dealt with the eastern side of the port. On the western side, we've got the Sulphur Point Marina, you've got the container terminal, the Sulphur Point Marina, and we're actually looking potentially at putting a University of Waikato Marine Studies Research Centre on there, and I would like to see some testing done in that area to make sure now that we're doing the right thing. I'm aware that on some of the buildings over there at the moment, a black soot, and some of the boats as well, a black soot coats those places every week. I don't know if it's good soot or bad soot, or if there's such a thing, but I just think it might be worth having a couple of your testing devices there to check that out before we go putting more people potentially in an interesting situation.
So we have located a brand new station there at the end of Sulphur Point on the western side. The thing with Sulphur Point, shipping emissions is probably our biggest issue. We are somewhat lucky, I guess. Sulphur Point is 100% sealed, so for an industrial site there is no longer any unsealed land owned or operated by the Port of Tauranga over there. And it's the container terminal, so we don't have loose bulk cargo on Sulphur Point. Everything is containerised that occurs there, so that does limit the type of emissions. We do, though, have fumigation of methyl bromide occurring on that side of the port as well, so that's what we are monitoring for. And black soot, possibly a likely cause is going to be shipping emissions, but I don't know until I see a sample of that.
Thank thank you, Mr. Irving, for your presentation, and thank you, colleagues, for your contribution to that debate through the questions there. Councillor Thompson, your meeting tomorrow, 9:30, is that in Tauranga? Is in First Ave in Tauranga, thank you. I would like to thank you all for coming here today. We're just about to move into confidential, so we will turn the recording off. However, that is just to receive minutes, so that won't take long at all. So can I have somebody please move by Councillor Granger, seconded by Councillor Clout, that we move into confidential for the receiving of those minutes. I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, and that is now carried.